We're going to go over some print options that are located on the Sheet tab in the Page Setup dialog box, which include setting up columns and or rows to be repeated on each of the sheets that are printed out. We can have the grid lines print out. We can change the page order. We have three choices to suppress the printing of error messages that show up on the worksheet. We can also print our row and column headings, and we can use a picture in our worksheet as a background to enhance the graphic appeal. So I have a schedule here with a fair amount of financial data on stocks of companies that begin with the letter A, or at least some of them, that are traded on the NASDAQ exchange. And we're going to use this schedule to demo some of the print options. But before we do that, I'm going to go to the print preview by pressing Control P. And sometimes when you go back to the print preview, you'll have this little icon, Show Print Preview, and you'll have to actually left click it to get it to display anything. And I have a print job here that's 2,246 pages. Now I said I had a lot of financial data, but I don't have that much financial data. What we have is Excel determining quite incorrectly on its own the range and the scope of the geographical area I want to print on the worksheet, and it's come up with 2,246 pages. Well, that's not correct, but if I were to send this to the printer without first identifying my print area, I'm going to get 2,246 pages. Most of them are going to be blank. So I'm going to escape to get back into the workbook, and we're going to set up a print area by pressing and holding the Shift key, press the End key, the right arrow key, still while holding the Shift key down arrow twice, press the End key and the down arrow key, release the Shift key, and now we've selected the entire range of the schedule of information that we have. Left click the Page Layout tab, Print Area, left click Set Print Area. I'm going to click on A1. Going back to the print preview, Control P, my print job is now 36 pages long. So we would have gotten 2,210 blank pages on our prior print job. So you kind of got to be careful about that. Always set your print areas up before you run a print job. So this is page 1 of 36 pages. It's the top upper left corner of the schedule. And by default, page 2 is going to be the page below that on the schedule. So we continue to run the list on the left side of the companies. But I lost my column titles. Going back to the first page, I had company name, ticker symbol, industry name, and SIC code. When I went to page 2, my column titles disappeared. When I go to page 3, which is back up at the top of the schedule, I get my column titles back, but my row titles, my company names, are now gone. And going down one page, I now have the worst of all worlds, where my company names, my row titles, are gone, and my column titles are also gone, so I have no idea what this information is or what it pertains to. So we're going to fix both of those things. Escape to go back into the worksheet, left-click the Page Setup dialog box, go to the Sheet tab, and you can do this in one of a couple of different ways. You can left-click this to collapse down the dialog box, but you don't have to do that. As long as you click in the field and the cursor is blinking, you can select the rows that you want to repeat at top. I'm going to select 1 and 2 because I want 2 to be that buffer between the titles and the content. And the columns to repeat at left is column A, which is going to get me my company names. Going back to the print preview, I now have a print job of 56 pages. It was 36 pages because we've added content to all the sheets that are going to be printed out. This is page 1. It looks exactly the same. I have my column titles. When I go to page 2, which is just below page 1, I still have my column titles. When I go to page 3, I have my column titles and my row titles. And page 4, where we had the worst of both worlds, we now have the column titles and row titles displayed. So we fixed both of those issues. Escaping to get back into the worksheet, left-clicking to launch the dialog box. The way to get rid of the print titles is to select them and delete them. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave them intact and go on to grid lines. Left-clicking grid lines, left-clicking OK. We don't have anything that we noticed that was different in the way the information and content is displayed in the worksheet. We, of course, have grid lines on the worksheet, which we can turn off. It sort of gives a cleaner look to the worksheet. But those aren't the grid lines that will print or not print. Because these are off, we're going to go back to the print preview, Control P, and we have grid lines that are displayed that are going to be printed. So those are two separate pieces of functionality. All of the cells here are bordered out with a dotted line, the grid, which can make tracking through the schedule visually a little bit easier. The next thing we're going to do is change the page order. Now, I mentioned a couple of times that the order is what the default setting is, which is down and then over, and the graphic displays that pretty well. We can also go over and then down, and again, the graphic displays what that means. I'm going to leave that setting, and we're going to deal with these error messages that are in column G. I set up a formula to generate an error message on purpose so we can deal with them, because currently on the print job, they'll be shown as displayed on the screen. We have three other options, though. We can have each cell that has an error message display as a blank cell, or we can have a double dash put in the cell, or we can have # n/a not applicable, which is actually an error message in itself. I'm going to choose the double dash and go back to print preview and go to page 2, which now, since we are going over instead of down, we see the column that's column G that had the error messages showing that currently we have on our print job, the double dash. Escaping to go back into the worksheet, we still see the error messages, of course. There's another setting we can take advantage of, and I'm going to launch the page setup dialog box again, and that is to print the row and column headings. Going back to the print preview, we now have A, B, C showing on the top and numbers 1 through 44 showing on the left-hand side. If you're printing out your schedule, if you're printing out your worksheet, this can help in a discussion about the content on the worksheet. If you had a hard copy, and we were discussing this, and I were to say go to cell C21, you would quickly go to the cell that contains the word power. But if I were to try to describe that cell and direct you to it in some other way, it would be a bit more difficult if I didn't have the row and column headings printed out on the sheet. We have one more bit of functionality we're going to cover, and that's using a picture to create a background in your worksheet. I'm going to left-click background. That takes me to the place where I have my practice files, and I have a logo 4, which I selected, and I'm going to left-click insert. And while I'm not suggesting this is a good result in this particular case, it does display the fact that what we have is a tiled background, and you'll find that it is throughout the entire worksheet. I can go to the bottom of the worksheet to row 1,000,000, and there it is. Going back up to A1, not only that, we have complete coverage, which may or may not be what we want, but the picture takes a subservient position to the content that was in the worksheet to start with. All the text is over on top of the picture. The picture is actually behind the text. You can see this most obviously in column G, where we have cells that have a blue fill, and that overlays on top of the picture that is clearly behind that content. One more thing about the background, I'm going to go back to the print preview, Control P. It does not print out. It's a visual display within your workbook on your worksheet, but it will not print. I'm going to escape to go back into the worksheet, and to get rid of it, our background command button is now a delete background command button, and you left click it and the background disappears. So in this movie, we looked at some of the print options on the Sheet tab in the Page Setup dialog box, which included identifying rows and columns that we want repeated on each sheet in our print job. We also had the ability to print out grid lines. We could change the page order. We had 3 options in the way we could suppress error messages and how they're displayed in the print job. We could add our row and column headings to the print job to aid in navigation when you have a hard copy that you're dealing with. And we used a picture to create a background in our worksheet.